for President Trump with the Atlantic in particular, there's definitely a interesting relationship there because we know that President Trump and, his allies repeatedly criticize the Atlantic and say that the Atlantic has been unfair to him. So it's incredibly ironic that all of this sort of played out with an Atlantic editor. So I don't think it's necessarily surprising that President Trump is continuing to really dig in his heels on that. But it seems that, the more Democrats call on them to step down, the more they dig in their heels.
In the US, in politics there, the fallout from yesterday's group chat scandal is very much continuing. Now, if you missed this, let me try and explain it. It's a journalist from The Atlantic magazine was added to a group chat on the app Signal by mistake, and it involved government. This chat involved government officials. So you had National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, who I think he was the account who set up the conversation. J.D. Vance was in there, the Vice President, Pete Hegseth, the Defense Secretary, all involved in this. And then there was all these big conversations about they were going to bomb the Houthi rebels in Yemen, and they were talking about those strikes. They were criticizing some of the US's allies. So Europe got called pathetic in this, and all of this was being seen by a journalist from The Atlantic. It has since then got quite confusing. So Mike Waltz has been admitting responsibility for the error, but then Donald Trump has been blaming one of his advisors, a lower-ranking member of staff. Let's try and clear it up then by hearing from Julia Manchester, Washington reporter at The Hill.
The question a lot of Americans are asking, or a lot of reporters, I should say, are asking is, are heads going to roll because of this? Who's going to take the fall because of this? I was on Capitol Hill yesterday, and basically what we were hearing was a number of Democrats in the House and the Senate. In the Senate, you saw the intelligence ranking member on the Intelligence Committee, Senator Mark Warner, Democrat, call on Pete Hegseth and Mike Waltz, the National Security Secretary, Hegseth, obviously the Defense Secretary, to step down. You also saw House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, a Democrat, call on them to step down. But President Trump has given no indication that he wants anyone to resign. In fact, he's stood by Hegseth and Waltz amid this. In fact, President Trump was asked at the White House with Mike Waltz there, essentially, what he thought about this. And, he acknowledged that, mistakes happen, which is what he sort of suggested, but then later said that, implied that this wouldn't happen again. Mike Waltz went on Fox News last night to, essentially defend himself and, sort of slam the Atlantic and all of this. So it seems like the more Democrats are making a fuss about this, the more President Trump and Republicans stick by those involved.
Yet they are having to do that, which I find quite interesting. I think normally a lot of criticism, certainly from the Democrats, but also questions from journalists, never really seem to touch the sides of the administration, never seems to faze them or bother them. It's either an outright denial or it's an attack back, but it doesn't seem to affect the way that they do politics. That doesn't seem to be the case with this. It does feel like this is touching a nerve somewhere within the Republican Party.
A little bit, yes, but I don't think it's enough for the Republicans to want to take action against Waltz or Hegseth. It's almost like it's making them want to, I would say, stand even closer with them or defend them. Remember, for President Trump with the Atlantic in particular, there's definitely a interesting relationship there because we know that President Trump and, his allies repeatedly criticize the Atlantic and say that the Atlantic has been unfair to him. So it's incredibly ironic that all of this sort of played out with an Atlantic editor. So I don't think it's necessarily surprising that President Trump is continuing to really dig in his heels on that. But it seems that, the more Democrats call on them to step down, the more they dig in their heels.
What does this leak tell us about foreign policy. I mean, there's a lot of criticism of Europe in particular, being described as pathetic. There was talk as well about this sort of isolationist behaviour towards issues that might affect other parts of the world and other allies, in particular Europe. Do you think we learned anything we didn't already know?
I think it was sort of the way it played out. I think it's just not to sound like a broken record, but it's just so ironic because the way but it was just so casual, so blatant, a lot of this language. And you saw a lot of that language about Europe. And I think it was a reflection of the administration's foreign policy. One, part of that, though, that, has caught some attention is that in the group chat, at one point, Vice President J.D. Vance appears to, not necessarily break with President Trump on, how Europe is, moving ahead on this or how this will impact Europe. But it seems like, there's a difference in viewpoint between how he's viewing this and how President Trump is viewing it in terms of how it impacts Europe. So there's a question as to whether, there was a difference in opinion there. The vice president's office pushing back on that, saying that they're united on this. But overall, I think it's what we really kind of already knew.
Where does this go next then, do you think? Is this a scandal that is going to continue to escalate, or has it sort of just peaked now?
I think it's going to continue to escalate. First of all, there's going to be a number of lawsuits. You're already seeing government watchdogs start to file lawsuits against the Trump administration. You're going to see, Democrats continue to make noise about this on Capitol Hill. You might see some more moderate Republicans also be critical of this. So this is going to, plague Democrats, I think, going forward. The question is plague Republicans, excuse me. The question is, how do congressional Republicans, how did the Trump administration respond to this? I mean, there's no indication that anyone's going to get fired or step down. But we know that sometimes President Trump, watches the news, watches the media. And if this continues to play out in the media and it continues to be unflattering for the Trump administration, the tides could turn against someone like a Mike Waltz or Pete Hegseth.
Julia Manchester, Washington reporter at The Hill.
Good morning.
There was no classified material that was shared in that.
So then, if there was no classified material, share it with the committee. You can't have it both ways. These are important jobs. This is our national security. Bobbing and weaving and trying to, filibuster your answer. So please answer the question. If this was Director Gabbard, if this was a rank and file intelligence officer who did this kind of careless behavior, what would you do with them?
Senator, I'll reiterate that there was no classified material that was shared in that.
Ma'am, if there's no classified in materials, share. And then if there's no classified materials, then you can't even answer the question whether you're on the chat. This is strangely familiar, and I think my colleagues will remember, when you couldn't answer the question, is Edward Snowden a traitor? Putting aside for a moment that classified information should never be discussed over an unclassified system. It's also just mind-boggling to me that all these senior folks were on this line and nobody bothered to even check. Security Hygiene 101. Who are all the names? Who are they? Well, it apparently included a journalist. And no matter how much the Secretary of Defense or others want to disparage him, this journalist had at least the ethics to not report, I think, everything he heard. I'm going to go back to what I addressed at the outset. I mean, this was not only sloppy, it not only violated all procedures, but if this information had gotten out, American lives could have been lost. The Houthis had this information and could reposition their defensive systems. So I want to get a little more information about this. Director Gabbard, did you participate in the group chat with Secretary of Defense and other Trump senior officials discussing the Yemen war plans?
Senator, I don't want to get into the specifics.
Ma'am, were you on? You're not going to be willing to address. So you're not. Are you denying? Matt, will you answer my question, ma'am? You were not TG on this group chat?
I'm not going to get into the specifics.
So you
of
refuse to acknowledge whether you were on this group chat?
Senator, I'm not going to get into the
Why
specifics.
are you going to get into the specifics? Is it because it's all classified?
Because this is currently under review by the National Security
Because it's
Council.
all classified? If it's not classified, share the text now.
As the White House previously
Is it
stated,
classified or non-classified
I can
information on this text?
I can confirm.
Director Radcliffe, were you on the group chat?
So my communications, to be clear, in a signal message group were entirely permissible and lawful and did not include classified information.
Well, we will make
clear.
that determination, because if it's not classified, share the text with the committee. Director Patel, has the FBI launched any investigation of this?
Senator, I was just briefed about it late last night, this morning. I don't have an update.
I would like to get an answer by the end of the day. You know, again, this pattern of an amazing cavalier attitude towards classified information is reckless, sloppy, and silly. And perhaps what troubles me most is the way the administration has decided that we can take on all of our problems by ourselves without any needs for friends or allies. I agree that we've got to put America's priorities first. But America first cannot mean America alone.